Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing, and today we're going to be talking about your third ornament. It's sort of a controversial topic in some areas of early music, but I think we're starting to open up and we're starting to understand things a little bit better. It's vibrato. I think there's this misconception that early music, Renaissance, even Baroque, is performed or was performed entirely without vibrato, and that vibrato was something that was added perhaps in the Romantic era or the late Classical era, and suddenly we get to the 20th century and we have vibrato on every single note. When you read a little bit deeper, what you find out is that it's actually more complicated than that. Vibrato was approached differently in many cases in the past, but there definitely was vibrato, and there are some pretty compelling cases for situations where maybe singers or players were actually using quite a bit of vibrato. My duo partner and I actually made a number of articles for our new website, and one of the articles that she wrote was on vibrato, and it includes all sorts of citations and evidence of vibrato use in the 16th and 17th century. If you're talking about voice, for example, one of the most compelling ones is that when you look at organs from the period, there are surviving pipes that are meant to imitate the human voice, and they have vibrato. So I think that's a pretty compelling bit of evidence. In addition to writing about vibrato, we have viol players talking about different types of vibrato. One type of vibrato that uses two fingers within like the same fret. Another type of vibrato that's the single finger moving within a fret. For the lute, here's what we basically know, and there's a fairly compelling quote by Marsan in 1636, where he talks about how lute players before were using tons of vibrato, and it was too much, and we need to cut that back. But of course, we don't want to go so far that we have none, because that would be equally bad. And it's an interesting quote because we don't know what he means by in the past. Well, did he mean 10 years ago? Did he mean 20 years ago? We get a little bit of evidence because in Vallet's Secret of the Muses, Nicolas Vallet, he actually has a symbol for vibrato, and actually, is it in Secret of Muses? It might be Psalms of David, and so one of the other publications. But Vallet had an ornament sign for vibrato, and it's this kind of interesting double cross-hatching sign. It's very unique to Vallet, and I remember there's like a prelude that opens that literally has the symbol on every note. Or something along those lines, and it's clear that basically it's this sort of very vocal and interesting technique. Maybe he was trying to imitate a vocalist. So vibrato existed on the lute. It was something that was used, but it was used as an ornament. So I think for most even modern classical guitar players, we know that we're not putting vibrato on every single note. It's even sort of an ornament on the modern classical guitar. So I think this is less controversial than it is, say, for a vocalist or for a violin player, somebody playing a single line, because very often we've got these full chords and we just can't be doing vibrato at the same time. But places that are really, really nice for vibrato, the chanterelle, for example. And you can play around with how much you can have an energetic. What's kind of interesting to me, when we get to Mace and other slightly later sources in the 17th century, is the vibrato is in some ways the description is fairly aggressive. The hand is kind of coming off and the arm is shaking behind. And I should clarify, I haven't seen a description of the vibrato as being up and down. I always see this side to side. So if you're thinking about doing some vibrato as an ornament in your pieces, at least from historical sources, it would appear that it's not that sort of vibrato, sort of B.B. King-esque, in some cases blues vibrato, but just side to side. But the intensity, I think, can depend on the character of the piece. Are you doing something, or are you going and just sort of caressing it. I'll admit, this is not an ornament that has appeared much in my own recordings. Part of it is that I find that I can kind of get what I need without it. Though I've been thinking about maybe putting in a little bit more just since I know that it was something that was used. And then the other element of it is if I put it in, dealing with the comments. I mean, honestly, that's just to be frank. Like, I don't want to deal with somebody saying, "Oh, you're using vibrato on the lute. That's absolutely incorrect." It can be very, very tiring to have to pull out quotes and sources and say, "Look, we literally have a source here by a very well-respected lute player who's got a symbol for vibrato and clearly used it." And then we have another source that said people were using it all the time, at least in the early 17th century. So what I would say is it's an option. The places that I like to use it the most are usually when you have a single line, like for example, this opening to the Dowland's First Fantasy, the Polton #1, having something where you're going, this kind of high notes. And then I don't know, after that it's sort of multiple notes. I wouldn't use it. So maybe on that first note. And then maybe on the last note. So long notes are a good place to put them. In one of the viol sources, if I'm remembering correctly, is the Longuish. It's very, very good on sad pieces. So when you hit a high note, if you do something like, you can just wiggle the top there a little bit. But I think it's important to recognize that it was an ornament. It's something you can use. Some techniques for practicing it. What I would start with is either with your first finger or your second finger, and I would go side to side gently. There are kind of two ways. You can either move horizontally like this, or you can tilt. And it's a little... I tend to find that if I want a more intense vibrato, what I will do is the actual side to side, so moving between the two frets. And if I want something more languishing, the tip of my finger is staying in one spot. Which will be different than... So I've got this. You can play around with the kind of character that you're... It's maybe a little bit more of a stately vibrato. It's going to be a little more subtle than on your classical guitar, and you're going to have to play around with it. And this is maybe a challenge to me to include this ornament a little bit more in my music. Think about it. Maybe while you're playing your trebles, in particular, when you get to a high, beautiful note on that first string, try it. Now, it's not limited to the first string, as I showed with that, if I remember correctly, in that Valet prelude or whatever it is, he actually starts on like the third course, third string, and the symbol is right there. I don't know if he goes all the way up like that, but it's there. It's not a symbol that, or it's not an ornament that you're going to see a lot written in. Like I said, I'm bringing up Valet because it's one of the few sources that's still sort of Renaissance where they have it as a symbol. When you get later to like Thomas Mace and things like that, which I think is 1676, I think it's called The Sting in his book. Then you start seeing symbols kind of clearly putting it in there. But think about spots where you might be able to just add a little bit of vibrato. My lute teacher back in grad school, Paul Odette, used to put it this way. It's like, ketchup is a wonderful thing. If we're thinking of vibrato like ketchup, it's a wonderful thing. Most people don't take ketchup and pour it over their entire meal so that everything is drenched in ketchup. That said, if we completely get rid of ketchup, we're missing out on this wonderful taste. So maybe just putting a little ketchup in there every once in a while. And I don't think it's really something we need to make a big deal out of, but look for some spots particularly where you have a single held long note, and you can make that really, really beautiful. And then you run into these issues too, right? If you have a closed note, what do you do with the open one? And guitar players, I've seen some situations where guitar players will do something like this. And they'll shake it. So I don't know if that's necessarily the solution on the lute, but what you could do is just refinger the G. Something to think about. So that's your third ornament. I think it's one to use sparingly and in beautiful moments. Work on the different intensity levels. You know, you could really have it be like a sting and kind of get that tight sound going. I've never thought about the viol version, which is to do two fingers. It doesn't seem to really work on the lute. I'll have to think about it. But there's your third ornament, vibrato. I hope you enjoy it. I understand that there is some controversy when we talk about vibrato in early music, but I don't think there really is that sort of a situation with the lute. We know that they used vibrato. We're not entirely clear when it appeared, if it was there from the beginning, or if it's kind of toward the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century. We have symbols in some sources, like in Valais, where it's indicating vibrato. That's what it's being said. So think about spots where you can put it and justify its use. I think it's going to be a lot less common than your other graces, your shakes, and then your beautiful falls. So think about it, though. It's there. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. I'll be happy to answer them. And, you know, please don't bite my head off for saying that you can do vibrato on the lute. It's a thing. So if you're enjoying the channel so far, best way you can support it is by subscribing. I also will put my link to Patreon in the description, and it's always wonderful to get that kind of support. Have a great week. Happy looting, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.